Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
Today we're taking a look back, way back actually. We're comparing two huge global efforts to build peace after massive wars.
That's right. The League of Nations and the United Nations.
And for this deep dive, we're leaning on an article called League of Nations and the UN, Two Attempts with a Common Goal. It's from Bira, too, that's in all times, specifically their history and politics section.
Yeah, it offers a pretty interesting perspective. So our goal today is really to trace that line, from the League to the UN, see the shared aim.
And figure out how the first one struggled, why the second one was created, and crucially, how this particular source evaluates how effective they've actually been.
It's quite a story. You might find some surprises in how the article frames their successes and failures.
Okay, let's get into it. The first attempt, the League of Nations. Where did it come from?
Well, the source is really clear. The catalyst was the First World War, just the sheer, unbelievable devastation.
Right. The losses were on a scale nobody had ever seen. It created this huge pressure, didn't it? Governments had to find some way to prevent that again.
Exactly. And that push led straight to the Paris Peace Conference, January 1919.
And that's where they agreed to create this League of Nations.
That's the place, the specific goal, future peace. It was born directly out of that wartime horror.
And the commitment seems serious based on the source. The covenant, its founding document. It wasn't separate.
No, that's a key point the article makes. It was woven into all the peace treaties signed in Paris. Deliberately.
That really underscores the intent, doesn't it? They wanted it to be central.
Absolutely. And the core idea behind it was, revolutionary for its time.
Which was?
That aggressive war wasn't just, an attack on the country being invaded. It was framed as a crime against the whole world. Everyone.
Okay, that's a big shift. And that led to this idea of collective security.
Precisely. The principle that all states had not just a right, but an actual obligation to band together to stop aggression.
The thinking was, if everyone acts together, nobody would dare start a war.
That was the hope. The belief was unity could make aggression impossible. Now, the article notes these ideas weren't totally new. Philosophers had talked about them.
But this is the first time anyone tried to actually build it on a global scale.
Yes. The source argues that World War I, tragically, was what made its practical realization seem possible, created the political will.
So out of that terrible war comes this new body, formally founded January 10th, 1920.
The first universal intergovernmental organization, headquarters in Geneva.
With that one clear mission, keep the peace.
A noble mission, but putting it into practice, that turned out to be the hard part.
The source talks about an early test, right?
Yeah.
Germany's neighbors wanting protection.
Yeah, there was this proposal involving Germany, France, Great Britain, Italy, guaranteeing the Franco-German border, the Rhineland demilitarization.
And that led to the Locarno Pact, October 1925.
Yeah.
Sounds like a step in the right direction.
It seemed like it, an attempt to use agreements to build security.
But the article points out it didn't last.
No. March 1936, Hitler just renounces it unilaterally. A pretty clear sign that paper guarantees weren't enough.
And around the same time, you see these opposing blocs forming.
Right. The Rome-Berlin axis, Italy and Germany, October 36. Then Japan joins in.
And the source says this axis was actively hostile to the League. Basically ignored it.
Completely. Didn't factor into their expansion plans at all. Which tells you a lot about the League's perceived power or lack thereof.
So the period from 36 to 39, the article describes it as the League's sort of last gasp, trying to stop the slide towards another war.
Yeah, its formal bodies kept meeting, doing some things, but the really big decisions, the crucial international talks, they were happening elsewhere, outside Geneva.
And the list of crises the League just couldn't handle.
Yeah.
Pretty stark.
It is. The Spanish Civil War, Japan invading China, Austria's annexation.
Czechoslovakia, Albania.
Yeah.
The source says in these cases, the League was either just mentioned formally like an afterthought or totally ignored.
Basically, it had become ineffective in stopping major aggression by the big powers.
And then, September 1939, World War II starts. And the article says, nobody even bothered calling the League.
Pretty much. Its relevance for preventing that kind of conflict had just evaporated.
There was that one exception, though. Finland.
Yes. December 39. Finland did appeal to the League during the Winter War against the Soviet Union.
And the League actually did something.
It did. The Council expelled the USSR and tried to organize some assistance for Finland.
But the article frames that as basically the end of the line for the League's political influence on major wars.
Yeah, that was pretty much its last significant act in that arena. After that, politically speaking, it was sidelined.
And the source makes a point about the coalition that eventually fought Hitler. That wasn't a League achievement.
No, not at all. The article credits separate diplomatic efforts, singling out Churchill's work building the big union of allies. That happened outside the League structure.
So during the war itself, the League just faded.
Its main bodies, the Council and Assembly, they didn't meet. The article mentions the U.S. and Canada helped keep some economic and social work going, sort of on life support.
But politically?
Politically, it was finished.
So coming towards the end of World War II, the Allies are looking at this history. And what's the verdict on the League?
The source says they made a conscious choice. Don't try to revive the League's covenant. It hadn't worked. Time for something new.
A fresh start. So the League just ceased to exist.
Nominally, when the UN Charter came into force, October 24th, 1945, formally dissolved a few months later, April 1946.
How did people feel about that, according to the source?
Kind of bittersweet, it sounds like. Sadness for those who believed in the original idea, regret over the mistakes.
But also hope.
Yeah, definitely hope. Hope that the UN, this second attempt, could actually achieve those same goals, but more effectively this time.
So the UN's creation was directly linked to the League's perceived failures.
Absolutely. It was seen as attempt number 2 at a universal organization for peace, learning from attempt number 1.
And the founding process. San Francisco, April 45.
That's right. Delegates from 50 countries. They adopted the UN Charter in June, signed it, and it became official that October.
And the main goal, the article stresses this,
Was identical, exactly the same as the League's Prevent Future Wars.
What's fascinating, and the article really highlights this, is how much the UN borrowed from the League.
Oh, hugely. The source says the UN Charter was explicitly designed to fix the League Covenant's problems, to supplement it.
So the goals, the principles, even the structure and methods.
In almost everything, the article argues the UN followed the League's precedent. It built directly on that foundation. It wasn't a completely radical redesign.
Okay, so second attempt, similar blueprint, lessons learned. But here's where the article gets really interesting, looking back with hindsight.
Right, because over time, a different picture emerged about what actually kept the peace, or at least prevented another world war.
And according to the source, it wasn't primarily the UN's organizational principles.
That's the core argument presented. The main deterrent, the source contends, turned out to be something outside the UN structure itself.
Which was?
Nuclear weapons. The fact that the major opposing powers possessed them, that balance of terror.
Wow. Okay, so the article is basically saying mutually assured destruction, not the UN Charter, was the key factor preventing global war.
That's the interpretation offered, yes.
Yeah.
That this external reality, the nuclear reality, overshadowed the UN's intended role as the primary peacekeeper between great powers.
So if the UN wasn't the main deterrent, how does the source see its function evolving?
It suggests that the UN's principles sort of lost their bite as the primary force preventing conflict, and the organization shifted. It became more of a platform.
Platform for?
Diplomacy, negotiations, bargaining, maneuvering. Still vital, perhaps, but different from being the ultimate guarantor of peace.
And the article is quite critical about the nature of UN decisions in this context.
It describes them as sometimes perceived as hypocritical and biased, not always connected to changing events on the ground, and suggesting that how events are interpreted often depends on who's doing the interpreting, their known preferences.
That sounds depressingly familiar. The article draws a direct parallel back to the League's later years, doesn't it?
It does. Just like key decisions bypass Geneva then, the source argues that major international deals on the biggest issues today are often still hammered out outside the formal UN system.
But the UN does have something the League didn't. The Security Council. That was meant to be the game changer, right? Binding decisions, peacekeeping forces.
Absolutely. It was designed to have real enforcement power, the teeth the League lacked.
But the article immediately points out the problem with that, too.
Yes, the fundamental challenge. The veto power held by each permanent member.
Making agreement incredibly difficult.
Increasingly so, the source suggests. As the goals and interests of those permanent members diverge more and more over time, getting them all to agree on decisive action becomes, well, less and less realistic.
And what about the peacekeepers, the blue helmets?
The article views their role, often constrained by that Security Council deadlock, as being limited. Frequently, it says they end up just documenting what's already happened, rather than having the mandate or resources to actually prevent conflict effectively.
So let's try to wrap our heads around this. We've looked at these two massive efforts.
Both born from the ashes of world wars, both aiming for the same ultimate goal, lasting peace through nations working together.
We saw the League, high ideals, collective security. But it got overwhelmed by power politics in the 30s, couldn't stop World War II, faded away.
Then the UN rises, same mission, similar structure, but with tweaks like the Security Council meant to make it stronger, learning from the past.
And this is the core point from our source.
Ah.
The reality of preventing another catastrophic global war seems to have been driven more by nuclear deterrence than by the UN's own mechanisms.
Right. And so the UN evolved. It became this essential diplomatic arena, a place for talk and negotiation, but facing huge challenges in forging consensus and having a decisive impact on the very biggest crises.
It leaves you with a pretty provocative thought, which the source raises implicitly. You have these two organizations sharing this profound goal, the second designed to improve on the first.
Yet the article suggests major decisions still often happen outside their formal structures, and the main thing preventing the worst kind of war might not be their rules or cooperation, but this terrifying balance of power.
So what does that tell us about the real limits, maybe the inherent limits, of what these kind of formal international bodies can achieve when it comes to global peace? What stands out to you when you hear this history laid out?